U.S. is set to restrict visas for Chinese officials and civil servants over what it claims the abuse of human rights in China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. The U.S. State Department also announced last week that it is adding 28 Chinese companies to its blacklist, prohibiting them from purchasing American products. A report by Reuters and other international media outlets also claim that China has been working on a tit-for-tat plan to curb Chinese visas for members of the U.S. intelligence and those who work for rights organizations. So how significant will this proposed ban by the U.S. administration hurt exchanges between the two sides, and how credible is the claim that China is set to reciprocate? So before we go into the discussion, it is necessary to clarify that the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs has not confirmed any such plan to retaliate against any proposed U.S. visa restrictions for Chinese nationals. And during a regular press conference the following day and on another occasion, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson did not mention any specific countermeasures while answering related questions. Let's take a listen to what the spokesperson Geng Shuang had to say here.
I can say that China always holds a positive attitude toward people-to-people exchange with the U.S. We welcome people from various sectors in the U.S. to visit China for meetings and other activities, and have facilitated such exchanges through visa issuance and other means. The U.S., on the contrary, has for some time been denying visas, as well as delaying the processing of applications, revoking long-term visas, and harassing Chinese scholars, students, entrepreneurs, and scientists. This has thwarted normal people-to-people exchange between China and the U.S. and infringes upon the safety and lawful rights and interests of the Chinese personnel involved. Which side is facilitating people-to-people exchange, and which side is setting up barriers? The answer is crystal clear.
So let's turn to our studio discussion. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So as I said, last week the U.S. State Department announced measures to restrict visas for both government and Communist Party officials it claims are complicit in what it calls mass detention camps in China's Xinjiang. There were no further details given about specifically who might be denied a visa. However, it has been reported that U.S. politicians have called for action against Chen Quanguo, the Communist Party chief for Xinjiang. So as I said, while China has not confirmed any such retaliatory measures. First of all, Professor Liu Xiang, I think it is very clear that the U.S. has announced these measures. Yeah. What does such measures amount for? How strong, how serious should we take these measures? Or should we just say, okay, it's just another bluff, it's not going to hurt China really?
I don't think it's a mere bluffing, but we need to look at it in the context of the U.S., the China-U.S. dispute on trade. Actually, I believe this measure of restricting China officials' visa is part of U.S. Bargaining chip for making a deal with China.
So you think that the Xinjiang issue is kind of a card being played in the hands of the U.S. administration. Professor Gong, what is your take on the
Well, I think officially it is based on a piece of legislation in the United States called the U.S. Immigration and Nationality Act. It essentially says that the United States State Department can deny visas to those people whose visit to the U.S. would pose a adverse foreign policy consequence. But how is that related? It's a very tenuous argument here. I mean, allegedly, it's based on the argument that it's a violation of human rights. But I think it's, first of all, I don't believe there is any credible evidence to say that what's happening in these vocational training centers are indeed violations of human rights. And second, I think the United States have displayed its own acts that grossly violated human rights in various cases, and clearly it's a double standard. For example, the mistreatment of prisoners in Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, the mistreatment in Guantanamo Bay, and all these things are very clear indications that these things have been done in the United States. As a matter of fact, the director of CIA, Mrs. Gina Haspel, right? And she has a track record of being responsible for these human rights violations as an agent for CIA in these prisons. So I think it's a clear sign that there is a double standard here. And second, there's no clear evidence that any human rights violations been actually committed.
China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, yes, indeed, has clearly denied that there is any human rights violations there. But let's focus on the Chinese reaction. As I said, the Reuters and then now other U.S. or international media have claimed that the Chinese side has been preparing on a plan to counter the U.S.'s restriction on visas, not specifically to this latest announcement by the State Department targeting Xinjiang, but over the past few months, since May, for instance, we've seen in growing cases of Chinese scholars or Chinese students getting a visa increasingly difficult, and some people's original visa, which they already have been revoked. For instance, Professor Liu, you yourself have been subject to such kind of treatment, and without any legitimate reason for that kind of ban. So. How credible are these reports that China is going to put in some kind of measure to reciprocate the increasingly difficult visa regime for Chinese nationals?
Yeah, I believe there will be countermeasures if the U.S. Side take measures on take restrictions on Chinese officials, because their claim of the so-called abuse of human rights in Xinjiang is totally absolutely baseless.
But do you think China has been really preparing on a plan to react to the restriction of visas that has been in place since May on scholars such as yourself?
I believe Chinese government will have countermeasures to restrict some U.S. people's visa to China, because we have to react to this kind of irrational measures.
So some people are saying it is mindless, what it seems at this moment, and it seems it's continuing to develop this kind of visa war between China and the United States. Is it really getting so bad, John?
I think the issue of granting visa is very much a discretionary issue. I mean, you really don't have to announce a public policy that I'm going to restrict visas for this number of people, and put people on the list. This is, I think, it's more of as Professor Liu said, is a way of inserting some pressure in the context of the Sino-U.S. trade negotiation. So in return, I don't believe that there's much of a real significance of announcing this, other than sort of acting as a pressure. You can deny visa without you can deny visa to people without announcing it. Everybody does that. The United States government does that, right? Like in your case, they require to revoke your visa. So I think it's a negotiation tactic. But hopefully, my opinion, my suggestion is that we don't have to escalate and go down the path of publicly announcing, putting people on the list and that kind of things.
Yeah, because right now it's a question on the mind of many people here in China. How should China react to these situations? There is a perceived hostility, increasing hostility on the part of the United States towards China. So what is China's general principle in reacting to the situation? In general, is China going to stand its ground tit for tat and retaliate along every single step, or is China going to exercise maximum restraint, because we don't want things to spiral out of control, Professor Liu?
We encourage people-to-people communications. We welcome more American people visiting China. That's our principle. If we restrict visas of some U.S. people, visitors, that's because we have to do it. And I believe our government will take a measured reaction to the U.S. Restrictions on Chinese people.
But you said earlier that on the issue of Xinjiang, you think Chinese government stand will be very strong and will be very clear. Why so?
Xinjiang is very important for China. Now it's a strategic, it's a strategic front for Belt and Road Initiative. It's a critical link between China and
Central Asia,
and Europe. So the peace and the development of Xinjiang is critical to the development of our whole country. And you know, there are problems of terrorism in that region, and we're still facing danger and risk of that kind of things, and we need to do much more in that region.
So if China feels the importance, the necessity to retaliate, to reciprocate, what kind of measures is likely to come out? I mean, is China going to, for instance, place certain U.S. embassy companies or entities on a Chinese blacklist, meaning the unreliable entities list, or is China going to sanction or make it difficult for certain U.S. officials to get visa for China?
Yeah.
Professor Liu, you think so? Tit for tat.
You already said that. All these options are on the table, I believe.
Okay, Professor Gong, your take, your estimate.
I hope we don't go down that path, but I think there's been some talk about the Ministry of Commerce to put up a list of companies on the so-called entity list in the same way that Chinese companies are subject to the Department of Commerce entity list. But I think it's very different. This is very different from putting individuals on a separate list, right, and claiming these people will be explicitly denied a visa. And this is an entirely different scenario. I think I'm a little bit reserved about going down that path. I think that sets a very bad example, and this is something that we should try to avoid, I think.
Okay, that will be a real escalation.
Yeah,
exactly.
I believe there will be measured reactions, but we don't want to escalate the situation.
Okay, there is a difference there.
Yeah.
So let's just denote this U.S. action to place 28 Chinese companies on the U.S.'s entity list. And in these companies, for instance, many high-tech companies were targeted, for instance, Hikvision, Dahua Technology, and MagV, I hope I pronounced their names correctly, Technology, are among the 8 commercial groups on the list, all of which specialize in facial recognition technology. And Hikvision is one of the largest surveillance equipment manufacturers in the world. A wild question. Look, if the United States want to restrict people who are supposed to be complicit in helping, the atrocities, the violations in Xinjiang, they could have put, for instance, Boeing airplanes on a restriction list, because you sell these airplanes and the Chinese officials will be using them as transportation. Why not those companies, those products, but these companies instead?
Yeah, we know that the U.S. side has excuse for taking sanctions on these companies because their technologies are used to surveil people. But actually, we know all these companies are world-class leading business companies in artificial intelligence, and the U.S. want to constrain China's capability in this area. So this is the real reason for them to sanction on these companies. So the illegal surveillance is just excuse, not a real cause.
Okay, that's your interpretation of the situation. Well, many thanks. We have to leave it there. Many thanks to Zhang Gong from the UIBE, and many thanks to Professor Liu Xiang from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. You can always find me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.